This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and the intriguing and dangerous world of being a CIA operative. As much as we talk about the deep state, we know there are heroic men and women in our intelligence services who gather information to keep us safe from America's many enemies. And are there lessons from the experience of CIA operatives that are applicable to everyday Americans like you, Amy? Yeah. Well, one former CIA operative, Jason Hanson, has written a book on the topic. He's the author of the book "Survive Like a Spy: Real CIA Operatives Reveal How They Stay Safe in a Dangerous World, and How You Can Too." Could that be any more relevant in the city of Chicago? For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by the author of the book and former CIA operative, Jason Hanson. Jason, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So it's sort of an interesting premise of your book that there's application for the evasive tactics and security protocols that you followed as a CIA operative that would be useful in the lives of everyday Americans who are otherwise, most Americans otherwise not encountering danger on a normal basis. But give us some of those skills and experiences that you think are translatable.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, everything is. So one of them is, how do you know if you're being followed? So obviously, if a spy is going to meet an asset in a foreign country, they've got to make sure nobody's following them to that meeting. Mm-hmm. Well, you want to make sure you're not being followed home. You want to make sure you're not being followed out to a parking lot. And a very easy way to do that, I'll give you the 30-second version, is called an SDR, which stands for Surveillance Detection Route. And all that means is not going from point A to point B. So if you were going to go to a meeting, you might go to Walmart, then Starbucks, then you might go to the gym, then you go to the meeting. And obviously, if you saw the same person or same cars at each area, you would abort that meeting. So it's common sense, whereas if you're driving home and you think somebody's following you, don't go right to your house and park in your driveway. You know, take a left, take a right, and if that same car is there, well, then you're going to call the police. You're going to make sure you get to a safe area. So that's just a very simple way that all Americans can be safer using the same stuff spies do.
You know what I do is I just travel with 6 body doubles, and then we scatter
right.
as soon as I come out of a place.
Well, you also mentioned in your book, the number one way to deal with a threatening individual. I coach basketball, and I have to deal with a lot of individuals who are sometimes threatening at times.
They're called parents.
No, I would never say that. But, I mean, how do you handle an individual if you're in a threatening position?
Sure. So, yeah, here's how to take out a parent. First, you want to put your hands out. So put your hands out far away from your face, palm up, in the position of, hey, please leave me alone. Please don't hurt me. But the real reason you're doing that is your hands are extended far from your face. And you can jab your fingers right into their throat because the throat is incredibly vulnerable. It doesn't matter how big the guy is, how many weights he can lift. If you do a quick jab to the throat, they're going to go down, they're going to choke. It's going to give you time to flee to safety.
I think there's going to be a perimeter around you coaching in the future after people hear this interview.
My girls' parents are fine. It's just other coaches.
Well, what about, we talk about, particularly in light of these shootings and the debate about guns and the right to self-protection, the idea of ultimately in an emergency situation, you're going to be held responsible for your own self-protection, whether you want to be or not, the police being a reactive institution by their very nature. And the idea, if somebody tries to carjack you, we've had a rash of carjackings in suburban Chicago of late, or a home break-in, and if you don't have a gun, how you can improvise to protect yourself?
Yeah, I'm a big gun guy. I own way too many guns. But if you don't have a gun, if you don't like guns, which I realize not everybody does, you've got to plan ahead with something. Maybe it's a knife. Maybe it's a baseball bat. Maybe it's a golf club. Hopefully it's a dog. I mean, I own a German Shepherd, and they're fantastic because no criminal wants to get bit or leave DNA evidence. So I think the biggest problem people have is they don't plan ahead. So when your door is getting kicked in at 3 a.m., that's not the time to say, hey, how should I survive this home invasion? So plan ahead, whatever it is. I mean, there are even door braces you can put at your front door, and the door brace keeps the front door from getting kicked in. So take 5 minutes, plan what you're going to do, and of course we pray it never happens.
So I'm sorry, just to follow up on that. So I mean, are there recommendations you would have to harden targets like schools in the wake of the terrible Parkland shooting that should be considered by school districts around the country?
Unfortunately, most schools are so easy to get into, in my own kids' schools. I mean, they're never going to be able to lock them down enough, and you can just walk right in. The thing that needs to happen is they have to train the administrators and the teachers to swarm a shooter. That's what the Israelis do. The Israelis are very well trained. You hear somebody pulling out a knife in Israel, and 5 guys jump up immediately because they've all trained for that, because the country is obviously very dangerous. Here in America, we're not training anybody for that. So obviously I don't expect the kids to do that. But if an active shooter comes in, a natural reaction is for people to run away and flee, which of course just means it's wide open for him to shoot everybody in the back since nobody's coming towards him. But if we took, a few hours of training, I mean, it wouldn't have to be long, to teach these teachers and administrators, you've got to swarm, you got to rush the shooter, that will save numerous lives.
What about creating covert communication signals to protect your family?
Yeah, so let's say there's a crisis situation, obviously 9/11, for example. Cell phones were down, nobody's getting through because the towers are all jammed. So you've got to have a way to communicate with your family. It can be as simple as saying, hey, we'll meet at this location, or hey, I'm going to leave a piece of paper with a handwritten note at this location. It can be a ham radio. I mean, radios are very inexpensive, and they're still going to work. So people need to have something that, for kids at school, if they're at work, how are we going to communicate when the cell phone towers go down? Because in a natural disaster or a crisis event, they will be down.
Can you, I know in the book as well, there are a number of stories about your actual experience as a CIA operative. Give us your favorite or your best Jason Bourne real-life experience.
Sure. So one of my favorite stories, I'm actually going to use one of my buddy's stories.
Okay.
And it was the snatching of a narco-terrorist. So there was this very bad drug dealer, and we needed to get him off the streets, and the United States government wanted to make sure he couldn't flood the U.S. with drugs anymore. And so the misconception is that the CIA is just going to go out and pluck you off the streets, but it takes months and months of planning, years of planning in some cases, and you have to first verify the person, meaning you got to get fingerprints, you got to get a strand of hair, you got to get DNA evidence. Even if you know it's him, you still got to go back and prove it because you're taking somebody's life off the street. And then also, once that happens, you've got to have a way to snatch him. And in this case, it was a car accident. That was a fake car accident. So him and his security team saw this car accident, looked at him, and then he was snatched, had a bag over his head, and he vanished.
I love it. I love it. All right, don't try and break into Jason Hanson's house. There's some advice. Jason Hanson, former CIA officer, author of the book Survive Like a Spy. Real CIA operatives reveal how they stay safe in a dangerous world and how you can too. Jason, thanks so much for joining us.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one